The grand auditorium of the U.S. Naval Operations Command buzzed with anticipation. Rows of white uniforms sat in perfect formation, brass buttons gleaming under the ceremonial lights. Photographers positioned themselves discreetly, their lenses focused on the elevated stage where America's finest would be honored. The air was thick with tradition and pride, an atmosphere of valor that seemed to echo through the marble halls like a sacred hymn. At the front row sat Admiral David Harrison, a distinguished figure whose reputation stretched across every ocean. His chest displayed an intimidating array of ribbons and medals, each one earned through decades of blood, precision, and unwavering command. He wasn't easily impressed. Over 30 years of service, he had witnessed heroes rise and legends fall, stories bloom into mythology and fade into forgotten history. But today, his weathered eyes were fixed on one particular name printed on the ceremony program, one he'd heard whispered in hushed tones throughout Navy corridors for months. Lieutenant Maya Thompson. She wasn't what anyone expected. When her name was called, there was no thunderous applause, just a reverent silence that seemed to hold its breath. Every head turned in unison. Maya stood from her seat in the third row, her movements precise and controlled. Her face revealed no emotion, no hint of the storm that had brought her to this moment. She didn't scan the crowd or bask in the attention. Instead, she walked forward with the mechanical precision of someone who had learned to bury everything deep inside. The announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium, reading carefully sanitized fragments of a classified mission. Lieutenant Thompson is awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism during Operation Nightfall in the Philippines. His words felt hollow, too clean for the weight Maya carried in her silence. The real details remained locked away in classified files, even 18 months after the operation had ended. Rumors had circulated among the enlisted ranks, whispers of a devastating ambush, of teammates pulled from certain death, of a woman who refused medical evacuation despite critical injuries. Most dismissed the stories as exaggerated. Some believed she'd been protected by higher-ups, but no one doubted that something extraordinary had happened in that jungle. Admiral Harrison watched her climb the steps with mechanical grace. Her posture was flawless, too flawless. Not the proud bearing of a soldier seeking recognition, but the rigid control of someone who had learned to armor themselves against pain. She saluted with textbook precision, eyes forward, jaw set like granite. He stood and approached her on stage. For a moment, their eyes met. Hers steady but hollow, his sharp with curiosity. He shook her hand firmly and pinned the medal to her uniform. The audience erupted in applause, rising to their feet in waves of respect. Cameras flashed, but Maya barely blinked. No tears, no smile, just a slight nod of acknowledgement. "Congratulations, Lieutenant," Harrison said quietly. "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice barely audible above the applause. He wanted to ask more, wanted to pull her aside and demand to know what really happened in that jungle. Why she carried herself like someone still fighting a war that had ended months ago. But this wasn't the place for questions. The ceremony continued. Other names were called, other medals awarded. Maya returned to her seat as if nothing had happened, but Admiral Harrison's curiosity only deepened. As the event wound down, he watched her politely decline conversations with other officers, standing apart like an island in a sea of celebration. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of unrecognized heroes. When the crowd began to disperse, Harrison made his way toward her. "Lieutenant Thompson," he called. She turned, offering another crisp salute. He returned it, then gestured toward a quiet corridor. "Walk with me." She hesitated for just a moment, then followed him away from the noise and cameras, down a hallway lined with portraits of fallen heroes. Their footsteps echoed against marble floors, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. "You refused this medal twice," Harrison said, his voice even. "I did, sir." "Why accept it now?" Maya didn't answer immediately. Her eyes traced over the framed photographs, so many young faces frozen in time, forever captured in their prime. "I thought no one cared enough to ask why," she finally said. Harrison stopped walking. Her tone carried something he hadn't expected, not rebellion or bitterness, but a bone-deep exhaustion. The voice of someone who had carried a burden too long and had almost forgotten what it felt like to set it down. "I've read your file," he said. "But I know how files can lie." Maya's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "They don't lie, sir. They just leave things out." He studied her closely, trying to read what the official reports had failed to capture. "I authorized Operation Nightfall," he said. "I remember the briefing. Covert insertion, classified coordinates, intelligence indicated minimal resistance, standard extraction protocol." "You remember wrong," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. Harrison's brows furrowed. "How so?" Maya turned to face him fully, something raw flickering behind her controlled expression. "We were sent into a trap, Admiral. We weren't supposed to come back." The conviction in her tone stunned him. "You believe the mission was compromised?" "I don't believe," she said. "I know." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of voices from the auditorium. Then Maya said something that would change everything. "If you really want to know why I didn't want this medal, you need to see what it actually cost." Harrison's expression shifted. "What do you mean?" Maya stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Not just in lives, sir. In flesh and bone." She glanced toward a nearby security door. "Come with me. I'll show you." The small briefing room was sterile. White walls, a single table, 2 chairs. No surveillance equipment, no interruptions. Admiral Harrison entered cautiously, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Lieutenant Maya Thompson stood at the far end, back turned, hands resting on the table's edge. "I haven't been in this room since my debrief," she said quietly. "Funny how places hold echoes." Harrison remained silent, sensing he was about to witness something that would fundamentally change his understanding of command responsibility. Maya turned around slowly and began unbuttoning her dress blues with quiet determination. Her undershirt clung tightly to her athletic frame. With measured calm, she raised it just high enough to reveal a landscape of scars across her right side. Brutal, twisting lines that told a story of torn muscle, shattered bone, and battlefield medicine performed in the dirt. Just beneath her ribcage, 2 hard lumps pressed against her skin, fragments of shrapnel still embedded 18 months later. Harrison took an involuntary step forward, his breath catching. These weren't clean surgical scars. They were the brutal evidence of survival against impossible odds. Maya lowered her shirt and rebuttoned her uniform in silence. Harrison sat down slowly, his hands trembling slightly. "Why didn't they remove them?" he finally asked. "Too close to the lung. Extraction would risk puncturing it. I chose to live with them." "You carry that every day?" She nodded. "They ache during storms, sometimes during PT. Most of the time I forget they're there, until I see people clapping and giving me medals for surviving what I was never meant to." Harrison leaned back, everything suddenly feeling hollow. The ceremony, the medal, the carefully worded citations. "I've seen combat injuries before, but those scars, they tell a different story." "It's not just the scars," Maya replied, taking the seat across from him. "It's what came after." For the first time since entering the room, she looked him directly in the eye. "After the extraction, I woke up in a hospital in Guam. No command debrief, no investigation. Just a nurse, a promotion recommendation, and orders to rest." "You weren't interviewed about the mission?" Harrison asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Once, by a captain I'd never met. He asked 3 questions, took notes for 5 minutes, then left. A week later, I was being recommended for the Navy Cross." "That's not standard protocol." "No, sir. It's damage control." Her words hit like a physical blow. "Because someone made a catastrophic error, and they needed the story buried." Harrison leaned forward, tension building in his spine. "You're saying this was covered up?" Maya nodded grimly. "Because the truth would have destroyed careers and exposed something far worse than a failed mission." The helicopter rotors thundered overhead as the 6-person Navy team rappelled into dense Philippine jungle under cover of darkness. Lieutenant Maya Thompson had memorized every detail of the mission briefing. Their objective was clear: extract Dr. Samuel Brooks, an American biochemist kidnapped by insurgents near Mindanao. Intelligence indicated light resistance, minimal hostile presence. A quick in-and-out operation. But from the moment her boots hit the soggy ground, something felt catastrophically wrong. The humidity was suffocating, but the jungle was eerily silent. Too quiet for an area supposedly crawling with guerrilla activity, Maya's. Tactical instincts, honed through years of special operations training, screamed warnings as she led her team deeper into the vegetation. Radio communications were clean, GPS signals strong, but the biochemist's tracking beacon was moving in patterns that didn't match a hostage situation. "Team Alpha, this is Thompson. Something's off about this location," she warned through her headset. "Pattern suggests we're walking into prepared positions." They didn't get far before the jungle exploded into chaos. Suddenly, muzzle flashes erupted from the tree line like deadly fireflies. A devastating crossfire of automatic weapons turned the quiet forest into a killing field. Hidden mines detonated beneath their feet, sending dirt and shrapnel flying. The insurgents knew exactly where they would land, exactly when they would arrive. "Ambush! Take cover!" Maya shouted, diving behind a fallen tree as her communications specialist took a sniper round to the chest. Screams echoed through the undergrowth as her carefully trained team was systematically torn apart. Maya scrambled toward the nearest wounded man, Petty Officer Rodriguez. Blood poured from a gaping wound in his thigh, arterial bleeding that would kill him in minutes. She dragged him behind a boulder just as another explosion ripped through the air, sending metal fragments slicing through her right side like burning knives. White-hot agony tore through her ribs, but she stayed conscious through sheer will. She reached for Rodriguez again, lifted him despite the searing pain, and began moving toward what she hoped was safety. That was the beginning of a 4-mile journey through hell that no one was supposed to survive. Maya remembered it in fragments, pulling one teammate, then another, her own blood soaking through her tactical vest, breathing so shallow she thought she might suffocate. At one point, she bit down on her sleeve to keep from screaming and revealing their position to the hunters still pursuing them. By dawn, she had somehow carried 3 critically wounded men to the extraction point. Her arms were shaking uncontrollably. She collapsed to one knee, vision blurring from blood loss, just as the rescue helicopter appeared on the horizon. A Navy SEAL medic rushed toward them. "Jesus Christ, what happened out here?" Maya's voice was barely a whisper. "They're alive. Take them first." She collapsed unconscious in the mud. When she regained consciousness 3 days later in the military hospital in Guam, her chest felt wrapped in fire. Tubes snaked from her nose and arms. Monitoring equipment beeped steadily. A nurse smiled down at her with gentle eyes. "You're lucky to be breathing," the nurse said softly. Massive internal bleeding, 3 broken ribs, and multiple shrapnel wounds. The doctors had to leave 2 fragments in place, too dangerous to remove. Maya tried to speak, but her throat was raw. She gestured weakly for something to write with. On the medical chart beside her bed, she scrawled, "How many made it?" The nurse's smile widened. "All 3. Because of you." The Navy wanted statements. The press wanted interviews. Command wanted to parade her as the embodiment of heroic sacrifice. Maya refused everything. Her commanding officer visited once, carrying a medal recommendation form. "You've more than earned this," he said, placing the papers on her bedside table. Maya looked him directly in the eyes. "Who authorized the mission intelligence?" He hesitated. "Why does that matter?" "Because it was a setup." He offered no response. Maya tore the recommendation form in half. When she returned to active duty 8 weeks later, her body had healed, but her spirit remained fractured. She moved through her duties like a ghost, training recruits with mechanical precision, speaking only when required. The Navy promoted her to full lieutenant, but she declined all ceremonial honors. When the Navy Cross was mailed to her quarters, she mailed it back with a simple note: unearned. For over a year, she maintained her silence. Some of the men she saved came to thank her personally. One broke down crying in her office. She hugged them, smiled reassuringly, then returned to her isolation. The 2 metal fragments remained embedded beneath her ribs, literal pieces of that nightmare forever lodged in her body. Sometimes late at night, she would press her fingers gently against the lumps. Not because they caused pain, but because she needed the reminder. It was real. It happened, and someone had deliberately sent them to die. "Now you understand," Maya said. her voice steady in the sterile briefing room. "I didn't want recognition for surviving an ambush someone orchestrated. I wanted accountability for the betrayal that made it necessary." Admiral Harrison stared at her, pieces of a larger puzzle finally clicking into place. "You have proof it was deliberate?" Maya reached into her jacket and produced a flash drive. 18 months of investigation, time-stamped communications, satellite data, financial records linking Apex Defense Technologies to the insurgent group that attacked us. Harrison's face went pale. "Apex Defense? They're one of our primary contractors." "They were testing a new AI-driven battlefield prediction algorithm," Maya continued. "Our mission wasn't a rescue operation. It was a live fire test to see if their system could accurately predict soldier movement patterns under combat stress." The revelation hit Harrison like a physical blow. "They used your team as lab rats?" "Expendable test subjects," Maya confirmed. "The biochemist was already dead when we landed. The tracking signal was attached to a decoy. We were never meant to extract anyone, just provide data points for their machine learning system." Harrison stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is beyond criminal. This is treason. And it was covered up by someone high enough in the chain of command to alter mission records and bury investigation reports," Maya added. "Someone who decided that protecting Apex Defense's contract was more important than American lives." "Why tell me now?" Harrison asked, turning back to face her. "Because you looked at me during that ceremony like you wanted the truth, not just the sanitized version," Maya replied. "And because I'm tired of carrying this alone. Those fragments in my ribs remind me every day that someone in our own command structure sold us out." Harrison returned to his seat, the weight of command suddenly feeling heavier than ever. "What do you need from me?" "Justice," Maya said simply. "Not for me, for the men who didn't make it home, and for the ones who will if we don't stop this." The next morning, Admiral Harrison sat alone in his secure office, Maya's flash drive locked in his safe, her words echoing in his mind. He had spent the night reviewing classified communications, cross-referencing financial records, and slowly uncovering a conspiracy that reached deeper into the Navy hierarchy than he had imagined. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "This is Admiral Harrison. I need to speak with the Inspector General immediately. We have a problem that goes to the very top." Maya's courage in speaking truth to power had set events in motion that would shake the foundation of military-industrial relationships. But more importantly, it had given voice to every service member who had ever been betrayed by the system they swore to protect. The scars on her ribs would always be there, but now they spoke louder than any medal ever could. They spoke of sacrifice, survival, and the unbreakable resolve to ensure that no one else would be abandoned in the name of corporate profit and bureaucratic convenience. In the months that followed, Operation Nightfall would become synonymous with reform, accountability, and the courage of one lieutenant who refused to let her scars heal in silence. The investigation that began with Maya's revelation grew into the largest military corruption scandal in decades. Apex Defense Technologies saw their contracts terminated and executives facing federal charges. Vice Admiral Crawford, who had approved the altered mission parameters, was court-martialed and stripped of rank. But perhaps most importantly, the Thompson protocols were established, mandatory oversight procedures ensuring that private defense contractors could never again use American service members as unwitting test subjects. Maya's transformation from silent survivor to vocal reformer didn't happen overnight. In the weeks following her testimony, she received both praise and condemnation. The pressure was immense, but Admiral Harrison stood beside her at every hearing, every moment when institutional resistance threatened to crush her resolve. "You saved more than your team that night," he told her after a particularly brutal cross-examination. "You saved the integrity of everyone who wears this uniform." Maya's new role as a military ethics advisor brought unexpected challenges. She found herself traveling between bases, training officers to recognize the warning signs of compromised operations. Each presentation began the same way, with her placing her hand over her ribs where the shrapnel still rested, saying, "This is what happens when profits matter more than people." At Quantico, a young Marine captain raised her hand. "Ma'am, how do we know when to question orders versus when to follow chain of command?" Maya smiled grimly. When something in your gut tells you that the people giving orders care more about test results than bringing you home alive, that's when you ask the hard questions. 18 months after the scandal broke, Sergeant Tyler Rodriguez visited her Pentagon office wearing his dress blues and a nervous smile. "I wanted you to see this," he said, handing her his officer candidate school acceptance letter. "I'm finally ready to lead others the way you led us." Maya felt tears threaten for the first time in years. "Tyler, you don't need to do this because of what happened." "I'm not doing it because of what happened," he interrupted. "I'm doing it because of what you did afterward. You could have stayed quiet, collected your medal, and moved on. Instead, you fought for all of us." That evening, Maya walked through Arlington National Cemetery, something she did whenever the weight of memory became too heavy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Harrison. "New contractor proposal on my desk. Red flags everywhere. Your expertise needed ASAP." Maya smiled, feeling the familiar ache in her ribs as she turned to leave. The fragments would always be there, but they had evolved from sources of pain into instruments of purpose. Back at her apartment, she opened her laptop and began reviewing the new contractor files. Buried in the technical specifications, she recognized the same subtle patterns that had marked Operation Nightfall. Her fingers moved across the keyboard, documenting every inconsistency, every indication that service members were being viewed as data points rather than human beings. As she worked late into the night, Maya reflected on the journey from that sterile briefing room where she had first shown her scars to Admiral Harrison. The physical wounds had healed as much as they ever would, but the emotional transformation continued daily. She had learned that survival was just the beginning. What mattered was what you did with the life you'd been given back. The Navy Cross sat on her bookshelf now, not as a symbol of personal achievement, but as a reminder of responsibility. Every time she looked at it, she heard the voices of those who hadn't lived to tell their stories, demanding that she continue speaking for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Years later, when young officers asked her about courage, she would place her hand over the fragments still embedded in her ribs and say, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking truth when silence would be safer." The medals she had twice refused now sat in a place of honor in her office, not as recognition of heroism, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with truth. Maya Thompson had learned that heroes aren't born in moments of crisis. They're forged in the aftermath, when choosing between comfortable silence and uncomfortable truth. In that truth, every scar became a victory. Every painful memory became a shield protecting others. And every fragment of shrapnel became a reminder that some battles are worth fighting, no matter the personal cost. The war had ended for Maya Thompson the night she carried her teammates to safety. But her mission, protecting those who serve from those who would exploit their service, would continue as long as she drew breath. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't surviving what was meant to destroy you. Sometimes it's using that survival to ensure no one else has to endure the same betrayal.